Welcome to your fake therapist. And now, here's Hog Nogger.
You are listening to me now because you have problems. And that's nothing to feel too bad about. No man or woman who has ever lived has had a trouble-free life. Even cats and dogs have problems. I'm Hog Nogger, and I have devoted my entire life to those in need of psychological care and aid. If you're willing to join me, we will work together to make something of your life. Perhaps you still don't believe me, though, and you think that your abject state of mind somehow marks you out as unique. If that's you, I have a little activity I'd like you to do each day for the following 2 weeks. I'd like you to approach 5 strangers per day and ask each, politely and respectfully, a simple, innocuous question. Ask, do you have severe problems in your life? I promise you, some portion of those people, perhaps a small portion, will answer yes. Of the rest, many will no doubt ignore you, insult you, or avoid the question in other ways. Some may even spit at you or run away. Let me tell you right now that these are not the reactions of people at peace with themselves. They are visceral overreactions to an innocent, gently posed question. Do you have severe problems in your life? You have done nothing wrong in asking a harmless question of these strangers. You have committed no impropriety. The strength of reaction and discomfort that your little question will doubtless elicit tells you that all of these people have significant problems indeed. We can go on to diagnose these problems on a case-by-case basis, depending on the exact details of the reactions you receive, but that would not be the best use of our time together. The reactions will speak for themselves, and you will be convinced that almost everyone has severe problems. So you are not alone on that foundering ship, that blazing thoroughfare. You have many companions on that vessel, on that road. But it doesn't have to be this way. I can help. I can't solve your problems for you. You will have to put your shoulder to the wheel also. But by labouring together, we can make real progress in your life. Why believe that I can help you? I'm sure you're asking that question right now, and it's sensible and fair to ask. Since false modesty is not a virtue, but a vice, it would be unethical for me not to tell you that I have led a life of distinction. Not only that, but it has been a very long life of distinction. In my 860 years on this earth, I have come to understand many things. Of particular relevance is my abiding interest in what's come over the last couple of centuries to be known as psychology. Now, lest you think I'm just a dabbler, I should say that I was well acquainted with nearly all of modern psychology's founding figures. And typically, when new patients learn of my past, they nearly always want to ask me what it was like to meet Freud, Jung, or some other so-called luminary. Since you will inevitably make some such query, let's get this out of the way now. I can tell you that Freud was a disappointing man, rather morose really, and by the end of his life, as you will discover if you peruse his last work, he had given up on people. This ran contrary to all of my advice and is something I will never do. In fairness, he did show promise as an original thinker. I gifted him with a few foundational ideas, tipped him off about the subconscious and a few other things, but much of his work is original. So far as therapeutic psychology goes, I have made various attempts to educate the psychological profession, but they are not always good listeners, so the discipline hasn't benefited greatly from my experience. That's a shame, but it's not productive to linger over what you can't alter. So yes, While I contributed some foundational ideas to Freud and others, my influence hasn't been as great as it ought to have been. I've found experimental psychologists to be much more receptive. If you've read William James's Principles of Psychology, well, that was chiefly my own work. The material on the stream of consciousness is almost, without exception, the word of Hognogger. I spoke, James dictated dutifully. The poor man was only moderately talented, and he had this older brother who was a fine novelist, the meteoric talent of the family, and one day William came to me. He was a mess, and I felt for him. But let's get back to things that really matter. I can help you, but it's not just because of my own experience and personal contribution to psychology. As I like to say, you can buy training, but however much money you spend, you can never buy an education. And I was educated by a greater man than myself. I say this without a trace of false modesty. That man is Dr. Flinkey. While I have been among you for many years, Flinkey is a much older man still. You might perhaps have heard of Socrates. Well, no, Flinkey is not Socrates himself, but in his youth he did sit at the feet of Socrates. So yes, he is in fact the last surviving classical Greek. To learn, as I have, from the example and teaching of such a man as Flinkey is something I doubt you will be able to grasp. But suffice it to say that we are talking here of a major force in world history. It's sometimes said that the most influential philosopher across all of human history was Aristotle. I don't say that this is mistaken, but between Aristotle and Flinkey, well, it would be a close-run thing. You likely know of Flinkey's contributions, but from the lips and pens of others. Flinkey is a man of ceaseless innovation and invention, but he is also a man of quiet, gracious achievement, who lets others claim the plaudits for his work. Galen, Descartes, Copernicus, Newton, Einstein. You hear those names and you think, greatness. But beneath the names, there is an insistent whisper that you never heard. Flinkey, 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 Flinkey. These men are all Flinkey's mouthpieces. Their ideas and creations are Flinkey's ideas and creations. But it's not just his influence on the history of ideas that marks him out. Flinkey has helped so many people over the course of his life that it staggers and sometimes even shames me. Let me give you just one example. Julius Caesar stands on one side of the Rubicon. A masterful general, a masterful motivator of men, a man who knew exactly when to take a risk. This man stands poised, then says, "Let the dice be cast," and crosses over. Soon, the teetering Roman Republic is no more, a colossus of a man. But peer back a few years, and you'll see quite a different man. Here it's worth quoting the Greek historian Plutarch, a man Flinkey held in high esteem, by the way. In like manner we are told again that in Spain, when he was at leisure and was reading from the history of Alexander, he was lost in thought for a time, and then burst into tears. His friends were astonished, and asked the reason for his tears. "Do you not think," said he, "it is a matter for sorrow that while Alexander, at my age, was already king of so many peoples, I have as yet achieved no brilliant success?" What happened in the intervening years to transform this simpering, whimpering, weeping willow into a true man of steel? One word: Flinkey. In the history of teacher-student relationships, one lineage is mentioned frequently as the apogee. Socrates taught Plato, who taught Aristotle, who taught Alexander of Macedon. I would not disagree that this is an almost unparalleled lineage. And yet, I wonder if the contributions of Flinkey, and even those of my good self, were more widely understood, whether the lineage, Socrates, Flinkey, Hognogger, would be similarly revered. I do not presume that our lineage is the greater, but it bears comparison and does not fall too far in the shade. Flinkey and I have observed with dismay the rise of the self-help industry. Book after book rolls off the presses. Then there's the countless websites, blogs, and now even podcasts. It saddens us to see the same old tired ideas retreaded, repackaged, recapitulated. This is the self-help industry. It is called an industry for a reason. New models roll off the assembly line apace, looking different, sometimes, from previous models. But underneath, the chassis is the same and the engine is the same. Over and over again, it's the same vehicle with different upholstery. While this industry doubtless transmits some useful information, Flinkey and I are firmly committed to fostering only truthful, honest, realistic responses to your problems. We will also not regale you with psychobabble or pseudoscience. All our babble has a firm basis. The self-help and also the training fields are replete with this pernicious nonsense. Recently, for educational purposes only, I enrolled in a training and assessment course, and there was much of this stuff. Corporations send their staff at considerable expense to learn how to be trainers, and they are told things like, only 7% of the effectiveness of any presentation you give comes down to the content. The rest is all down to body language, vocal inflections, and the like. I'm glad Flinkey wasn't there to see this. Socrates railed against the sophists, and Flinkey would have been mortified. Any fool can see that this is junk. Suppose you are training some people about your company's code of ethics. And suppose you get the presentation perfect. Body language, vocal intonation, and so on. According to the 7% theory, you could use a random word generator to generate all your content for the presentation. You get a final grade for your presentation of 93%. Yet all you have conveyed is a random string of gibberish. The source of this 7% myth is a blatant misinterpretation of a psychological research paper published in, now listen for this, 1967, nearly 50 years ago. The obvious point to be made is that presentation is important. A rambling, mumbling, expressionless presentation is undesirable. That's clear enough. Why dress it up with spurious statistics? This is the kind of junk rife in the self-help, motivational training fields. And people lap this up while other people make a lot of money out of peddling this bilge. Don't be one of the suckers, my friend. I would never insult you with this rubbish, nor would Flinkey. Send me a letter, and I will make you feel much better. Welcome to the Send Me a Letter segment of this podcast. In this segment, I will field letters, queries, and we will all learn from my responses to these queries. Since this is our first time together, I'd like to start with something not too shocking. Nothing from the margins of therapy, so to speak. The letter I received from Terry the other day, which I'll now share with you, outlines a common problem, and nothing about the problem, nor the advice I'm about to share, should be too shocking. Terry writes, after several years of being single, I decided to be proactive about my romantic life. I set up a profile on an internet dating site, but I'm not really having any success with it. It's heartbreaking not to get any nibbles, or responses at all, and I wonder what I am doing wrong. I'd be really grateful if you could have a look at my profile and give me some feedback about it. Any other thoughts or tips you might have would also be much appreciated. With thanks in advance, Terry. Well, Terry, I have had a look at your profile. In general, I have to say it's 2 thumbs aloft. I will suggest later that you scrap the entire thing and start over, but the profile itself is nicely done. Here's my first thought then. I noticed that you are a single straight man looking for a straight woman. It puzzled me slightly, then, to see that your profile appears on a dating site for lesbian separatists. This is a site for gay women. I can see where you're going with this. After all, there are lots of women on the site, which perhaps is what attracted you in the first place. But lesbian separatists are unlikely to want to spend a great deal of time with you. I'd encourage you to place your profile on a site that includes at least some heterosexual or bisexual women. As for which sort of site to go for, I'd say you should definitely avoid going for a free site or a site that's inexpensive. It doesn't really matter how good the service is on any of these sites. The fact is, you won't find women who are serious about finding a man on those sites. So my advice to you is to find the most expensive site you can and put your profile on that site and pay as much money as the site asks. Accept all their special offers and options. It really will help. Make sure that the site is expensive for the women also, not just for the men. This means that they are going to be serious about finding a quality man, because look at all that money they're spending. So spend as much money as you can. That's important. Take out a loan if needs be. If you're not willing to take out a loan for this, well, that's telling you something significant. Finding a romantic partner is not as important to you as you think. And this stuff about finding a woman is actually a smokescreen, a defense mechanism that's stopping you from looking honestly at what is really wrong with your life. Second point, I'd look at changing your username. Balls and All is a gutsy name, and it tells the women that you are ready to commit since you are going to go in balls and all. But it does also sound rather desperate, and perhaps even a touch crude, and it makes you sound dumber than you probably are. What I'd suggest, if you want to stick with the testicular theme, is something like empty scrotum. That's a much more engaging profile name. Right off the bat, it presents you as a much better educated man, because rather than dealing in colloquialisms, you're using the correct anatomical term for ballsack. And empty scrotum also reveals your deeper spiritual side. It reminds us of absences and voids, the darkness that lies within, in this case within your ballsack. These are deep spiritual tropes that are ancient and powerful. There's a kind of perverse magnetic attraction to the void. We want to fall in, to be enveloped by it. It's mysterious and irresistible. Go with empty scrotum, and I guarantee that your profile will generate interest. It's also a good way of screening out undesirable women. Some women will assume that you actually have an empty ballsack and will reject you on that basis. These are not women you want to meet. They have no imagination and an overly rigid, literal mind. Spend too much time around women like this and they'll drag you down to their level. Now, as to the profile itself, I notice that you say you like walks in the park, scuba diving, visiting art galleries, watching sport, drinking beer, attending jazz performances, writing musicals, building and maintaining dirt bikes, beekeeping, designing men's cologne, removing lint from sofas, pigeon counting, and gate-crashing press junkets. You list your favourite films as being Rambo 4, Mary Poppins, Independence Day, and various sheep-crutching documentaries that I've never heard of. These are wonderful interests, and I commend you for all of them. However, the image you present here is not that of a unified man, but of a horrific Frankenstein's monster assemblage of man parts collected from lots of different men. It's clear enough to me that you are not really interested in all of these things. Now, I don't wish to accuse you of dishonesty. You're employing a diffuse approach, which has many precedents, but which you would be better off discarding. Remember, the aim is not to try and attract any woman you can. You're not a piece of dung to be satisfied with attracting all sorts of different insects, beetles, and canines. You want to hone in on a specific sort of woman. That is, you want a profile that is targeted. This scattergun stuff won't fly. Here is my best advice. I don't suggest that you refrain from being dishonest in your profile. That's expected and normal. Part of the social conventions involved in internet dating, in fact. So lie to your heart's content. Just make sure that you're lying with a clearly defined purpose. Here's the new plan. I suggest you write the most disgusting, sickening, depraved profile that it's possible for you to write without having the dating site pull it down. This may sound counterproductive, but bear with me. I'm a psychologist par excellence, and I can tell you that my reasons for this advice are well-founded. There's plenty of psychological research which confirms that human beings are more attracted to bad news than to good news. That's why news bulletins are full of murder reports rather than grannies beaming at children, and why people think that the crime rate is going up, even when statistics show that it's going down. We love a biased sample, and we particularly love a sample biased towards the negative. Put two pictures side by side. Have one be of a smiling, radiant person, the sort of person you'd love to know or to be. And have the other be of a bent-backed, miserable and grumpy old coot. The human eye hones in on the coot with laser-like speed and accuracy. What is repellent attracts. Let me tell you what this means for your profile. Make your profile like the coot. I suspect that very few, if any, women have actually read your current profile all the way through. Make your profile sickening and disgusting, depicting yourself in the worst possible light, and I guarantee that nearly all of the women who look at your profile will read it right down to the very end, even if they have to retch in the process. Now, here's the really important part. Your profile is going to be sickening and disgusting, but with a twist. Make sure that the last few sentences of your profile portray you in a very good light indeed. If you can think of anything accurate that presents a really positive picture of you, then put that down. Otherwise, just make up any old guff that sounds good. For instance, you could say that you cried tears of joy when you first held your sister's baby boy. This lets the reader know that there is at least one woman on the planet who still talks to you, and that you have at least some fine qualities. Remember I said that you should drop the piece of dung mentality that had you trying to attract anyone? My strategy will achieve this. If you've done the job properly, the vast majority of women will not want contact with you after reading your new profile. But you don't want the vast majority. You want someone precious and rare. A diamond among the slag heap, so to speak. This profile will get you that diamond. This profile will attract intellectually curious detective types. Your current profile is too wildly inconsistent to elicit any interest from the curious detective. It's all over the place. But your new profile will be just inconsistent enough to present the curious detective with a puzzle. A mystery, if you will, to solve. The curious detective will either want to contact you or will welcome any messages you send her. Once you are actually able to start an online conversation with a woman, I trust that you can take it from there. You didn't mention any social deficits in your letter, so I'm assuming that you'll be good to go. If your problems are wider ranging, then please let me know in a follow-up letter and we can work on these other issues at another time. I trust it's clear why the curious detective is the diamond you seek, but just in case what is obvious isn't obvious to you, let me explain. A man is, in some respects, a wretched creature. Sometimes he can be led astray by his non-empty ballsack and consider things which really shouldn't be considered. Yes, sometimes men are unfaithful. This causes many problems for many people, and I don't want you to be among them. For instance, if you were to become attached to the kind of rigid, unimaginative woman who comes to believe on the basis of your new profile name that you have 0 testicles, you might be able to cheat on her and get away with it. And I don't want you to bear that burden of guilt, the burden of guilt that would inevitably follow. But with the curious detective, you will be strongly motivated to remain faithful. The curious detective is good at picking up on little inconsistencies and discrepancies. Considering your abilities, such as I imagine they are, you would be unlikely to succeed in being unfaithful to her without being caught. I am recommending the curious detective, then, because of her particular deterrent qualities. You won't try anything you shouldn't. This will allow you to lead a life that is much less guilt-ridden than it otherwise might be. And chronic guilt is one of the most debilitating mental conditions around. This is top-shelf advice that you will get nowhere else. If this strategy fails, it will only be because you have not carried out my instructions to the letter. If you haven't secured any dates after 2 months with the new profile, you should conclude that you lack the capacity to follow instructions. There's no shame in this. It might mean that you have leadership potential. Perhaps one day you will be a president or a prime minister, maybe even a CEO. I offer you a second strategy in case the first fails. If you are an accomplished computer hacker, this will be right up your alley. If not, spend a few years working on it or hire someone to help out. What you will be doing is sending bulk requests to the dating site's servers. You will send so many requests that the servers can't cope and the dating site will go offline. Keep doing this until you are caught. You'll probably appear in the newspapers, on television, and on internet news sites and blogs. Here's the crucial thing. The women on that dating site will all know who you are now. If there are enough women on the site, then at least 2 or 3 will probably want to visit you in prison. When they do visit, you can think of those visits as first dates and go from there. And as a final side note, don't worry too much about the prison sentence. It's generic computer hacking with no national security implications, so you'd be looking at a minimum security prison, and it should be, if not ideal, then at least tolerable. And think of all the women. Thank you for joining us. You have made a wise decision, a prudent decision, a decision that in the long term will be of benefit not only to yourself, but to your family and the extended community. By listening to this podcast, you will be getting the help and assistance that you so desperately need. Listening to this podcast will help you to flourish and become the pert pot plant that you know you've always wanted to be. If you would like to feature in our regular letters segment, please contact us at hognogger@gmail.com. I apologise for the difficulties you may have with my name. It's an old name, and it's not a name that has much currency anymore. It used to be a very popular name. The rafters were stacked with hognoggers. There was a hognogger under every rock. I was very disappointed with my mother for choosing that name. It was just, really, does it have to be hognogger? Right. 5 and 6, 7 of my friends are hognoggers. It would be nice to have your own name. Well, now I do have my own name. And so does Flinky. Until next time, go well. When it's hard to smile and nothing seems worthwhile, hog nogger,